Good morning. We are on Daf Hey Amud Aleph. Last time we discussed yet another source for how we know that chametz on Erev Pesach is Asr. Good morning, though. How we know chametz is Asr from Shah Shishi, notwithstanding the position of the Mechtam, the position that we learned that you could actually keep the chametz and then destroy it. The Balamor's position that you could actually eat the chametz after the 6th hour or in the 7th hour, and thus Mekayim the mitzvah tashbitu. The standard is that chametz kicks in, the Isra kicks in the 6th hour. Last time we talked about lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. We talked about the relationship between the again not ach chalak, but just as a pasuk not to have chametz around when you're offering the korban pesach, and we said that might be somehow it might undermine the korban pesach, the validity of the korban pesach. That would be one possibility. Or no, that the korban pesach is totally fine, but just you have chametz in your zone, and that's a problem. So today we're going to really just focus on 3 words. I might be breaking my record in terms of smallest amount of Gemara accomplished in one day, but today we're going to focus on an important sugya that also is Parshat HaShavua, so I thought that would be good, and also just is very important to just know. And we haven't really talked about this in the last 21 years, as far as I know, so it's a good opportunity to talk about it. So the Gemara in Hey Amud Aleph says, Tanya Nami Hachu, we have a Braita, sorry, the English is not here. But Tami Nami Hachu, we have a Braita that has a machloket that also discusses the various reasons how we know that Chametz is Asar on Erev Pesach in the afternoon. Okay, so it says, Ach Bayom Harishon, this was Parshat HaShavua, right? We read this yesterday. Ach Bayom Harishon Tashbitu Seyor Mibatechem Me'erev Yom Tov. So when it says, on the first day, this was yesterday's reading, you have to get rid of the Chametz in your house. So is that Me'erev Yom Tov? Oh, Eino Ela B'Yom Tov Atzmo. Does that mean on Yom Tov itself? Talmud Lomar, and here the Gemara in Rabbi Yishmael's position doesn't say, it says Shivat Yamim. We're not going to get to the Shivat Yamim that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And here it says no. Talmud Lomar Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi Lo Tishchat Ta Pesach V'Adayin Chametz Kayam. Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael says I have a combination. It's not just right. Lo Tishchat Chametz. Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi. It's Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi. That already tells you that you're not supposed to have chametz there. And then Ach Yom Rishon must be congruent to that. Mm-hmm. So Yom Rishon must be Erev Pesach. That's Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Okay. Rabbi Akiva, right? So he has like a different combination, and we can think about why he has a different combination than we had before. Because last time we had, if you remember, Ach Yom Rishon. How do I know Ach Yom Rishon means Erev Yom Tov? Because it says Shivat Yamim Ken Tochal Matzot, and if it says Shivat Yamim Tochal Matzot, so then you couldn't possibly be eating Pesach. Here he has the combination of Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi plus Okay. That being said, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Eino Tzarich. I don't need that. Hari Omer, Ach B'Yom Rishon Tashbitu Sorim Batechem. Uchtiv. Here we have new material already. Rabbi Akiva. Uchtiv. Some problem in the gears here. Kol Melacha Lo Yeyaseh Bahem. Okay. It says you have to get rid of chametz from your house on the first day, but it says you're not allowed to do malacha. Mm-hmm. Right. This is going to open up the possibility. This we'll talk about next week. Right, of can you, maybe should you, if you find chametz on Pesach, burn it on Pesach? But Rabbi Akiva seems to think that that's not possible, because it says, Kol malacha lo yaseh bahem, you can't do malacha, right, on Pesach. We'll come back to that pasuk in a few minutes. And, he says, I know, matzinu, you should underline these 3 words, l'havara shehi av malacha. I know that havara, burning, is an av malacha. Everybody agree to that?
Okay.
Sure. Everybody agree? Avar is malacha, yes? Yeah. Okay. You will come out of that was smart enough. No, not to answer that question. So, right. So we know Avar is a malacha. So if Avar is a malacha and you can't do malacha, so obviously you can't burn the chametz. But the Torah told you to get rid of the chametz on the first day. But you can't get rid of it on the first day. Do you follow the argument? You can't get rid of it, not because of lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. In other words, look at me for a second. Draws you back to the Erev Yom Tov. You understand? It says, when are we offering the korban pesach on Erev Yom Tov? And you can't have chametz there. So Yom HaRishon can't possibly mean Yom HaRishon. Mm-hmm. Here he's saying, no. In other words, I'm drawn to the first day, but I can't do it on the first day. It's not possible to do it on the first day. It's not that there's something drawing me to Erev Yom Tov. It's just that Yom Tov is an impossibility, because the Torah says, get rid of your chametz on Yom Tov, on the first day. And we know that, number one, burning is av malacha, and two, we can't do malacha. Well, if you can't do malacha and burning is an av malacha, so you have to move it back. Okay, yafe. So, we'll get to that. Okay. So he does. So
equals Havara somewhere.
Yes, correct. So he assumes. Thank you, Danny, because you also fell right into the trap. So he's going to assume that tashbitu must mean Havara, or theoretically possible that if I give it to my dog or I throw it on the street or whatever, even though I haven't done an active Havara, the Torah treats that as an active Havara. Right? Yeah. Okay. You could theoretically say that. That apparently is Rashi's position in another place, but not for now, right now. Okay. So he says again two things. One, it says but I have two other texts that I have to contend with. And Havara is a malach. So what could it possibly mean? What are my only choices then? What must Yom HaRishon mean according to that? Erev. Okay. Rabbi Yossi Omer, tzarich. Rabbi Yossi is like we had in the Gemara before. Hari Omer Ach Bar Moshe Tashvid Tzor Mevatechem. He says I have this supposed to get rid of on the first day. Half the day, right? Vi biyom tov atzmo mi shari. So there's two sheets. I don't know what happened. Who took the first one? Who took the second one? So Rabbi Yossi says. So Rabbi Yossi has a third opinion in this Braita. So again, the first opinion is Jeff. We're still on the Tashbitu issue, but we're on the end of the Tashbitu issue now. Okay, so we're trying to figure out how we know Tashbitu happens on Erev Yontif. So in this Braita, forget about what we did last time. In this Braita, we have one opinion that says that it says Ashbi Yomer Rishon, but how do we know Yom Rishon? So we said, it says Lo Tishchat Al Chametz Dam Zivchi. That brings you already back to Erev Yontif, right? Because that's happening on Erev Yontif. That's Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says, I have two new psukim. This is the new material for today. He says, it says, but it also says, Kol malacha lo ta'aseh behem. You can't do malacha today. And we know that burning is a malacha. So if burning is a malacha and you can't do malacha today, must be Erev Yontif. Okay, that's Rabbi Akiva. We're going to come back to that. Okay, Rabbi Yossi says, tzarich, I don't need all your fanciness, Rabbi Akiva. This is the way the braytas are formulated. Is it in Erev or on Yontif itself? Talmud Lomar chalach. Divide something. Right? You can't tell me it's Erev Yontif. It's the Yontif itself. It wouldn't be mutter to do it on part of the day. Right? You have to stop, right? Shvita to eating chametz. And we know that achilat matzah has to be done for 7 days. Right? He doesn't even tell you that, but that's the old argument, right? Achtal divides up the day. Right? Some of it's mutter, some of it's asur, and we know you have to eat matzah for 7 days. Mm-hmm. So if we have this equation that you have to eat matzah for 7 days, that means you can't have chametz for 7 days. So if you're going to stop having chametz, you have to have it to stop it before. So we have three sources here, three ancient sources about how we knew. Again, the rabbis were really, befuddled by the language of the Torah. That's the truth. It says, but the bottom line is we have three sources. It's Rabbi Akiva that's most important for us today. So again, this whole page, if you want to summarize Daf Hey Amud Aleph, Daf Hey Amud Aleph is just what's the source for chametz on Erev Pesach. Okay, and again, notwithstanding the mechtam and the balamor that you can eat, like I said before, right? I just want to remind you of those crazy shitas that you can eat it after the 6th hour, even right, and thus accomplish tashbitu in some way. What's important for us today is, and for next week also, are the three takeaways from Rabbi Akiva. Okay, Amar Rava. So Rava is already third generation. Amoraim, and he says, Rabbi Akiva Tlat. He says, I'm living in the 270s or 280s, and I think that based on Rabbi Akiva's drasha, so just to remind you of Rabbi Akiva's drasha, right? Not the one that draws us back that we talked about last week, the one that draws us back to Erev Pesach. It's the one that says it's incompatible to do it on Pesach on the first day itself, right? Kol malacha. Right? Just remember, you have to remember the argument, otherwise it's going to be very complicated later on. Okay, you remember it says you have to get rid of Ach B'Yom HaRishon, but it says Kol malacha lo yaseh behem umatzinu lahavara shehi ach malacha, right? Right, and only Seth was the one who didn't answer when I said we all agree that Havara is an Hav Malacha, right? That's it. If you're asking that question, I'm not going to answer it. So that's his argument. He says we learn three things from Rabbi Akiva. Number one, Shmamina. You should have said this yourself, although we did mention it in passing. Shmamina ain't be chametz till it's reifa. I pass like Rabbi Yehuda that you have to burn the chametz because ostensibly, Joe, if I could just feed the chametz to the dog to get rid of it, then I could do that on Pesach on the first day of Pesach also, right? What was his problem? Remember his two arguments? It says Kol malacha lo yotaseh b'hem, and havara is a malacha. But what if right, that argument falls apart if there's some way to accomplish tashbitu without a malacha, right? Without havara.
From the chametz on Pesach, what you would be doing that.
So I feed it to your dog.
Flush it on the toilet.
Okay, I flush down the toilet. Okay, whatever. No, it's all those things. Again, unless you say, and Rav Lichtenstein spent a lot of time in this year talking about this, unless you say that somehow getting rid of chametz in that way is a kiyum in havara. In other words, you can flushing it down the toilet is basically an alternative way of burning. Who says burning is just flame? Right? Maybe burning is feeding it to the dog, whatever, and then you can differentiate. There's a Rashi in Beit when it talks about burning truma that says that you can't, even though you're supposed to, you have to burn truma, right? I'm just mentioning this. You don't have to really pay attention, but you have to burn truma. So can you burn truma on Yantif? So again, part of that is the mitoch. In other words, can you cook? Can you whatever? Rashi says not only can't you burn truma on Yantif, you can't feed it to your dog on Yantif. Ooh, that's complicated. Like what the heck? What's wrong with feeding it to my dog? I'm getting rid of the truma, right? So you have to differentiate somehow between truma and okay, said or not for now. That's one thing. I want to just say the three things Rabbi Rava learned from Rabbi Akiva. I think this is the one that's pretty obvious, right? He said, "Matzinu lahavara she'av malacha." Okay, so he obviously thinks that you were burning the chametz on Pesach, and therefore it's not on Pesach. It must be on Erev Pesach, right? You finally remember? We're trying to okay. Should I be pedagogically sound? Okay, skip to the third one. Okay, skip to the third thing Rabbi Akiva learns from here. He says, first of all, Rabbi Akiva must hold, to get to his argument, he must hold that chametz is burned. The third one, I'm skipping the second one. Lo amrinan hol v'hutra var letzarech hutra nami lo letzarech. This is Seth's point. Seth says, well, hey, if you're allowed to cook, then why can't I burn my chametz on Pesach? And Rabbi Akiva, if that's the case, your argument falls apart. Because your argument was, it's objectionable to get rid of the chametz on Pesach in the one way, now that we know what the one way is, right? The one way of getting rid of chametz on Pesach is burning it. And it's objectionable to do that because you couldn't possibly do that because that's him. So Seth piped up right away and said, what are you talking about? You're allowed to cook. If I'm allowed to cook, I should be able to get rid of it also. So says Rava, it must be that Rabbi Akiva doesn't believe in what we call mitoch, or however you want to say it. There might be differences between them, but for now, that's next week's class. Okay? Next week is, what are you allowed to do on Yantif and what are you not allowed to do on Yantif? Right? Because you're allowed to cook, does that mean, all right. We'll talk about that Gemara, right? The Rashi and Hayward Bay is about why can't you burn? In other words, why do we say, you remember, I brought this up a few times already. I told you we'll get to it. So next week in Mir Hashem, we're going to get to it. Right? What does the Gemara say you're supposed to do if you found chametz on Pesach? What does the Gemara say in the Gemara? Proper. Why not burn it? Tashbitu. Right? Okay, fine. Okay, so we'll have to figure that out next week. So that's the third one. But then also, again, number three, third statement of Rava about Rabbi Akiva, I think pretty straightforward. I think we can follow that, why Rabbi Akiva can't possibly hold that. It's number two that's going to be the source of our shir today, the topic of our shir, and that is, how does he connect this? Right? And there's three answers in the Rishonim, and it's the second answer in the Rishonim that's going to be open up the doors to like to a whole world of Torah. Okay, I apologize that on the left hand on the sheets I don't have the English. I apologize. So again, Amar Rava, Shmami Nami Rabbi Akiva Tlat. I can learn three things from Rabbi Akiva's derivation. Again, just to remind you, Rabbi Akiva's derivation. We're not drawing it back to Erev Pesach. We're saying on Pesach it's objectionable because it's called and Havara is the Malacha, right? And therefore it can't be a Pesach itself. First one, he must believe Ein Bior Chametz Elas Reifa. Right? We're talking about Havara here. Third one, Lo Amrin and Hoil. We don't say you can burn something just because you're allowed to cook. Right? We know you're allowed to cook because Heter Chol Nefesh, whatever. Right? What's the second one? Shmamina Havara Lechalek Yatzat. What does that mean? Again, the last time I did this sugya until now in detail I was in 9th grade. Okay, so what does this mean? So there's a Gemara in Shabbat on Daf Ayin. It quotes an ancient machloket as well, a machloket between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Natan. It is the same Rabbi Yossi, but that's not relevant here. Okay, that's the first source on the page in front of you. Netanya, Havara lelav yatzat, divrei Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Natan amar lechalek yatzat. What are we talking about? So please open up your Bible now. Okay, so this is going to we're going to turn into a Bible class for a little bit. Okay, open up to Shmot Perek Lamed Hey. At the beginning of Parshat Vayakil. And we will get back to Parshat Shavua. We were already in Parshat, yes, last week's Parshat, but we'll get to this week's Parshat in a few minutes. So what happens at the beginning of Parshat Vayakil? Moshe is commanded to build the temple, the Mishkan. Vayakal Moshe had called up Bnei Yisrael v'Malem El Dvar Masher Tiva Hashem. Right? You with me? Are you in chapter Lamed Hey? 35?
Lamed Hey, right?
Aleph. Sorry. Bnei Yisrael v'Malem El Dvar Masher Tiva Hashem. Shesh Yemim Ta'aseh v'Yom HaShvi Yelachem Kol Shabbat Shabbaton Hashem. Kol Aseh Malacha Yumat. Okay, that's our pasuk. You can't do Malacha on Shabbat. And then what does the Torah say? Lo Tevaru Eish B'Chol Mashatachem B'Leil HaShabbat. Right? That's the end of Rishon for ladies in the group, right? Yeah, Mashabbat, right? So, what's weird about this?
So Malacha and Tevaru Eish or get a separate bucket.
Right, correct. The Torah has singled out Havar. Okay? Havar is singled out here. Now, there's another place where it says V'charishu v'katir tishbot. That also was singled out once, and we talked about that a few years ago in the context of Shemitah and why Charishu Katir, but it's not even clear they're talking about Shabbat. But here it's clearly talking about Shabbat. Right? Why does the Torah single out burning? Oh, that's our machloket on Shabbat, on Masachet Shabbat. Okay? What's the machloket? Havara lelav yatzat or lechalek yatzat? Okay, lechalek yatzat is a little easier. What's lechalek yatzat? We know there's 39 malachot, but we don't know, we have no idea whether, maybe you'll remember this, or maybe you won't, from the 7th chapter of Shabbat, if you write and you plow and you sow and you bake on Shabbat because you forgot it was Shabbat, how many chataot you're chayav? You chayav 4 or you chayav 1? So, right, we have no idea. So the Torah goes ahead and singles out one malacha of the 39. In this case, fire. We can talk about why fire. Maybe that's the most basic malacha, whatever. You can talk about why it is. But the Torah singled it out to tell you, just like in Havara, if you do it, you're chayav a chata. So too, if you do 4 things like that, but you forgot it was Shabbat, you're going to be chayav 4 chataot. Where it's each lechalek. It's to divide up the malachot. It's a trick, right? Right? It's Rabbi Yishmael principle. You understand? So it's teaching you chiluk malachot. That's the learning phrase. Chiluk malachot means there are differentiate. Right? We differentiate, and therefore you have 4 chataot. And in fact, that's the way we paskin. Okay. What's lelav yatzat? The lelav yatzat is a much more radical theory from just based on where we grew up, not because in their time it was more radical. Havar lelav yatzat comes along and tells you, the 38 other malachot, you're chayav kareh if you violate them. On Shabbat, if you burn, if you cook or you burn or whatever, you light a fire, it's just a lav, it's a lo taseh. But you're not going to be chayav kareh. Okay? Wow. That's a big statement. Okay? So that's Rabbi Natan.
If you believe in Chalak, that is correct?
What? And if you believe that it's lachalek yatzat, then of course you get correct.
Which is the punishment, and does it apply individually?
Correct. So now, come back to our Gemara now. Okay. Again, this Tosfot that we're going to study, the second answer of Tosfot is again, it's like drama in the yeshiva world, right? That is the second answer of Tosfot. But we'll use the first answer, and the Rabbeinu Hanan has spoils for the second answer of Tosfot. Okay. So what does Rabbi Rava say? You remember Rava? We're in the 3rd generation. He's coming to reflect on Rabbi Akiva's explanation about. I know this sounds complex, but it's not. I think we all we're with the program here, right? Rabbi Akiva has one of the explanations about why chametz are asur on Erev Pesach. Rava comes along and he says, I can derive from Rabbi Akiva's explanation, right? You can't do malacha on Erev Pesach, you can't do malacha on Pesach, and Havara is a malacha. Says Rava, I can prove from there that he must be Havara lachalek yatzat. Right. That's exactly what I was hoping to get, which is, where'd you get that from?
Right.
How does that tell you? How does Rabbi Akiva's position get you to Havar Lachalek? That's it. On what basis do you say that? Okay, so Tosfot, answer number 1. Okay, this is the second text. Again, remember, it's Tosfot number 2 that we're angling towards. Okay, so Tosfot answer 1 says, he says, there's nothing inherent in what Rabbi Akiva said, in the content of what Rabbi Akiva said, that would lead you necessarily to say, Havara lachalek yatzat, right? That it's one of the 39 malachot, and you're chayav kared, and if you burn and you draw and you write and you whatever, you're going to be chayav 3, right? You understand what I'm saying? He says it's just, says Rashi, says Tosfot, midekari le'av malacha. It's just a linguistic thing, right? What were Rabbi Akiva's exact words? Rabbi Akiva was exact words. If you look back in the Gemara, again, for those.
The Havara should be on
Right, he says. It says, Kol malacha lo tasu. It says, don't do malacha. Umatzinu lahavara shu av malacha. So he says, oh, I can learn from that he must hold lacha that it's one of the avot, it's one of the 39. Right, yafeh. Dov said it nicely. He could have just said, Matzinu lahavara shu asur. He said, Matzinu lahavara shu av malacha. So linguistically, there's nothing fancy about this. It's just, along the way, he demonstrated that avar, or he seems to believe that avar is an av malacha. Okay. Should I be pedagogically sound and skip to the third answer and come back in a second one? Okay, let's do that. Okay, Rabbeinu Hananel, right? This is the fourth or the fifth source on the thing, says, Shaminan mina avar lechalak yatsa. He says, I'll tell you why. Because if avar was really just a lota asay and not, it was excluding it from the group, right? Jeff, not Rabbi Yishmael, first of all. It was just telling you, Havara, that's not part of this. That's just don't do it. Says Rabbeinu Hananel, Teiti asay de hashbatat chametz and litche lav davar. He said, if avar was only a lav, then what do we know on Pesach? There's a mitzvah of tashbitu. Oh, what do we know in general? Asay doche lo asay. So even if it was just a lav, you'd be able to trump it with your asay. So he says, that's how I get to. It must be a malacha. So Danny's looking at me and saying, Rabbeinu Hananel, I don't understand. So let's say it's a malacha. Why don't you still say that? Right?
Wait, so
again,
and therefore,
if it was a lav,
then
you'd have asay dochelot asay. You'd still be able to burn. You would have no argument that we push tashbitu back there at Pesach. Oh, right. What's the problem with Rabbeinu Hananel? Okay, so let's say lechalek yatzad. You still have asay dochelot asay. It's just a more serious lot asay, but you still have asay dochelot asay, right? Yeah, you follow the argument? Okay, that's a problem. It's not the most serious problem. When most of the Rishonim say this, they say Rabbeinu Hananel said it, right? In the Shir, Rav Lichtenstein said, this is the way to explain it, but I don't, it surprised me because I saw the other Rishonim quoting the name of Rabbeinu Hananel, he kind of said it like on his own. He said, you have to add another assumption here, which is that if Lechalek Yatzat, you understand what Lechalek Yatzat is? It's one of the Avot Melachot, then there's going to be another Isser that kicks in as well, which is called Shabbaton. But there's going to be a positive commandment also of, on Shabbat, you're supposed to rest and don't do malacha, right? We say it in Kiddush, right? What do we say? Do we say Shabbaton there? Well, anyway, in those psukim, it says Shabbaton. So the argument you have to make is that when you have an Av Malacha, if it's Lechalek and it's called an Av, right, then it's both an Asay, Lota Asay, and even though Asay does trump a Lota Asay, an Asay doesn't beat an Asay and a Lota Asay. So you have to say the word Shabbaton, Mikra Kodesh. I don't remember where the pasuk is. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Attached to the Av.
Shabbaton is not right. You have to say that again. Like I said, Rav Lichtenstein said it on his own. I saw in some of the other Rishonim, the quote Rabbeinu Hananel. Right. So that we'll have to see. Right, we have to think about. But the bottom line is Shabbaton generally appears in the context of a law. Okay, so that's number. So again, what do we have? We have three things we derived from Rabbi Akiva. Rava derived from Rabbi Akiva. 1 and 3 we got. Of the second one, Avar lelav yatzad or Avar lechalek yatzad, where he says it must be Avar lechalek yatzad. So we understand that it could be linguistic. We understand that it could be this Rabbeinu Hananel. But it's Tosfos' second answer. That's the drama. And here we go. Now we're getting to the hardcore of what we're doing today. So Tosfos says again, this is Tosfos by us, Tosfos and Dafei, the second source. Havar lachalek yatzet midikar le'av malacha. Okay, since it was called an av malacha, he said Havara is right. But what was his words, Danny? Again, matzinu la'av Havara shenikret av, something like that, right? Okay. Or Vomeriva, Vodemeriva. That's one of the Balei Tosfot. You ready? Delemanda amar lelav yatzah. If you really believed Havar lelav yatzah, you ready? In other words, it's only a lota say Havar, right? Lo davar u'esh b'chol b'shodechem was only whatever. You ready? Lo haya asur b'yom tov. Kevan de'ein shem malacha aleha. Ooh, that's a big drum roll. What is he saying? He's saying, again, I'm going to read it again because it's very powerful words. If it was only lelav yatzah, it was only a lota say, and it's not chayiv karei chef. And I remember I told you before, oh yeah, that's the only thing. Not the only thing. Says the Riva, says the Balei Tosfot. It wouldn't be Asur and Yantif to light a candle. Because it's not it wouldn't be Asur at all. It would be completely allowed. Because what is the Torah Asur on Yantif? Malacha or Malachat Avodah, according to Ramban. Right? You need something that has a Shem Malacha. And then it wouldn't just be cooking as mutter. Before you get to Mitoch, you won't need Mitoch. There's no reason you can't turn on light a fire on Yom Tif. So it's right, or smoke, because you don't have to start looking for, is it Shaveh L'chol Nefesh? Is it right? Or does it meet the criterion of Hatar L'chol Nefesh? There's no Hatar L'chol Nefesh. If you believe Harar Lelאו Yatsan, then basically you're saying it doesn't transfer over. Once something is Asur on Shabbat, this is the key line for me today. If something is Asur on the Sabbath, but it's not defined as a malacha, then it's not prohibited on Yom Tif.
Wait, so that would match.
Which means you can strike a match for no reason.
Wait, because
if you believe Harar Lelאו Yatsan. Once again, next week we'll talk about whatever.
The second pasuk extracts Avara from the category of malacha.
Completely.
Yeah.
That's what Lelאו Yatsan means. It's not a malacha. Which you have 38 malachot, or maybe 39, we'll add one. And instead, you have and that Havara is never going to transfer over to Yom Tov. Now I want to explore why. Okay, but if you don't believe I'm saying that, look in the run. Yeah, sure. If you believe Havara Latz, if you're in Rabbi Natan's, Rabbi Yossi's camp,
and the only problem with driving is Avara.
If the problem for driving is the ignition, then yes. Again, this is Tosfos' opinion. No one else goes so far as to say that once it doesn't have the Shem Malacha, which basically, just to make it very clear, there would be two levels of Isser on Shabbos. Not just from the perspective of the punishments, but the capacity to transfer over to Yom Tif.
Yeah.
And that raises the question, so, like, what happens on Yom Tif? Like, why are certain things, why is Malacha Isser on Yom Tif and not the Lo Taseis of Shabbat? And if it is the Lo Taseis of Shabbat, then why doesn't everything transfer? No, that's what I want to explore in a minute. But just look, the Ran says it more clearly, right? L'chalek yatzta, midekari le'av malacha. Okay. V'lishna dieg, v'lav dina. Okay, so that's the first answer. This is not a halacha in the first answer of Tosfos. So again, we have three answers about how we can get to the second principle of havar l'chalek yatzta. Either it's just a linguistic thing, or it's aseh b'tzalot aseh naseh. Inami de dina nami kadayik. The Lamandam, right? He says it's a halacha, right? So he says it actually much clearer. It's a din. No, this is not just theory. This is practice. If you believe if you're Rabbi Yossi, you believe that there is no problem of lighting fires on Yom Tov, not because of. Right? Now, this would fly in the face. Literally, it would crash. It wouldn't clash. It would crash into an explicit Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah in Masachet Megillah, you remember the Ein Bains in Masachet Megillah, Ein Bain Shabbat Yom Tov Ela Ochal Nefesh Bilad. Whereas the only thing is, and it turns out, according to Rabbi Yossi, according to the second and third Tosfos, it's not just Ochal Nefesh is mutter, fire is mutter. Right? You understand? This is high drama. That all of a sudden on Yom Tif you can light fire, right? Not because, again, you understand? We spend our lives trying to figure out how far can we pull mitoch, right? What is really allowed? So Tosfos, we'll see next week. Tosfos says, "Oh, you need tzarich tzat, right? You can't have no purpose. You can't just light a fire for the purpose of because you can't just go out and use fireworks on Yom Tif. Right? Think about what Yom Tif would be like if you're Rabbi Yossi, right? His Yom Tif is like a totally different Yom Tif. You're going out in the park and shooting fireworks out, right? It's not tzarich at all. Who cares? Never mlach. There's nothing wrong with this. But you don't have to start out, right? One of the principles of mito of ochal nefesh is it has to be shaveh l'chol nefesh, right? Entry, taking hot showers on Yom Tif, right? Taking hot showers on Yom Tif has changed in the last 20 years, in my humble opinion. Not just me. I'm not the only one. I'm sure your father felt this way also. I can say without even thinking about it, right? So I imagine, right? He did. He told you could take showers on Yom Tif, right? So, right, you have a 2-day Rosh Hashanah. Can you take a shower? Take a hot shower? Forget about like it's 1 day Yom Tif. Okay, here we can get away without taking a shower. Or you have Shabbos after Yom Tif. You take it. So can you do it? So one of the principles of ochal nefesh is it has to be shaveh l'chol nefesh. It has to be across the board. Everybody enjoys this kind of benefit. It's not like you enjoy smoking a Cuban cigar, right? You enjoy maybe again. That's one of the arguments. Smoking is whatever, but if it isn't, but you can shower. So you look in the post and they say absolutely you can't take a shower. You can't take a hot shower on Yom Tif. That's not shaveh l'chol nefesh. Most people take a shower once a week, right? Then comes in Dov's father and he says, "What are you talking about?" Right? It's just not true. Nowadays, everybody showers every day. Like that's a hygienic thing. We've realized, and therefore it becomes definitionally all. So you look into it 50 years ago, and they'll say, "No, you can't take showers." Even 30 years ago, and now you begin to see the change where people are saying, "Oh, it's davar shaveh l'chol nefesh." You don't need that according to the Tosfos. The second answer, if you're adopting Havara Lulav Yatsa. Who needs all those criteria of those? You have to do Shminiot Ba'avir to figure out. So it would clash in the context of this Mishnah, right? Okay. If you believe this, that it's not a malacha, then hey, I'm really interested in testing it in two ways. If we take Havara Lulav Yatzad, that it's not a malacha, so how seriously would we take this in other areas besides just not counting it as a malacha? In other words, where other areas come up, that's one thing. And then I want to ask myself, what about other lavim? Are there other things like Havara that, again, we generally pass in Havara L'chalak Yatzad, right? Havara, as you know, fire is one of the 39 malachot. But are there other things that are lavim? And maybe they're not Asur on Yantif. And then I want to really get to the main thing, which is what's the difference between the Shabbos and Yantif in this case? So I'll give you an example of what I mean in the first case, right? This is Gemara in Chulin, on Dafeh. This is the next source. Mekablin korbanot mipi shvashei Yisrael kadesh yachziru lahem b'tshuva. If someone violates, is a machal Shabbos, we still take their korbanot, right? We give them an aliyah and shul, right? We make them feel good. We want them to be closer. That's not like I didn't make that up. The Gemara says that, right? The Gemara says about korbanot. Maybe that's more serious than aliyahs and shul. Chutz from three people. Mina mumar, someone who's an apostate. Menaseh chetayayin, someone who pours libations to a foreign god. And what about a Mechal Shabbos Farhesia? Okay, we know Mechal Shabbos Farhesia. Sorry, I can't even say it Ashkenazi. Sorry, Mechalel Shabbat Befarhesia or Mechalel Shabbatot Befarhesia, someone who publicly violates Shabbat, is flying in the face of something essential to Judaism. In this case, to the extent that it's like Mechal, it's like pouring libations to a foreign god. Okay, would you say the same thing if Havara is only Lulav Yatzad, not Lachalek Yatzad?
Right.
In other words, once it drops down and non malacha, could you push that line and say, hey,
all he does is light fires on Shabbos.
All he does is light fires on Shabbos. So he's violating a law. But that's not chilul, as opposed to, he baked on Shabbos or whatever. He ground on Shabbos. Right, he plowed. That's Mechal Shabbos already. But would you, in other words, so you could test it there. It happened in the Chok Rishonim there, according to the law. In other words, people don't know. The Rishonim actually raised this question. They don't know. Right? Okay, so that's one way to test it. One second. There was one other way to test it. I see my sources fell out of order here. Let me just see if I can remember.
So itself be a problem on Tosfos' opinion?
What?
Because why would the Torah allow to point out one thing about Havara? If that was,
Jeff, what's the answer to that question? What's the context of those psukim? I was careful to read the psukim. The psukim were about Shabbat. On Shabbat, the Torah told you that Havara is not as serious. It was here not it. Havara is not as serious if you believe the Lord God said. And therefore you can't apply it to Yom Tov. The question is why?
In the context of Shabbos, we're singling out Havara to teach us about Chalak. And now we're saying
that's if you believe L'chalak. It's part of the Malacha. If you believe it's the Lav Yatzat, so it's coming to tell you, don't do Malacha. That's one category. And there's also this thing called Lo Tevaru Ishv'lo Chavash V'lechem Lo Yom HaShabbat. Which doesn't apply, which is on Shabbat is a lesser thing. It's not a malacha, and therefore maybe it doesn't apply. Okay, so before I get to the other categories, let's talk about why it doesn't apply. Because this is the main thing I want to do. Let's talk about why it doesn't apply. So here you have to open up. So you have to ask ourselves, when does it say like doing malacha on Shabbat and doing malacha on Yontif? Like where does that come up? Like I just showed you a place where it talks about Shabbat. It doesn't talk about Yontif in that context. And then like yesterday's parsha, we have, when you're offering the Korban Pesach, it's a Yontif, right? Mikra Kodesh, but it doesn't say Mikra Kodesh in yesterday's parsha, but it does say in don't do malacha, right? Shiva Yamim should be Yud Bet Yud Daled. Where is it? Yeah. Oh, it does say in Perik Yud Bet Pasuk Tet Zayin. Ubiyom Rishon Mikra Kodesh, Ubiyom Sheni Mikra Kodesh Yalachem. Kom Malacha Lo Yaseh Bahem. Ach Asher Yachal Lechol Nefesh Hu Levado Yaseh Lachem. So it says, it's a little strange because I don't know how this position of Tosafot fits in with that pasuk in Perik Yud Bet Pasuk Tet Zayin. Right? On the first day it's Mikra Kodesh, or the first day Pesach is Yantif, the last day Pesach is Yantif. Kol malacha lo ya'aseh bahem, ach asher ya'achel l'chol nefesh hu levado ya'aseh lachem. I guess what that means, Danny, is not lighting a fire. It means rounding or whatever, all the malachot, right?
Plowing or
not plowing. You can't do it from the beginning. You can't plow on Yantif. You can only do from the sixth one and on. not the first 5, something like that, right? But like, I don't know, what are the things that, kneading, stuff like that, kneading, that's like an example of one, right? You can't plant and say it's ochal nefesh, because you're not going to have the wheat that day, right? You can't sow, right? But you can bake, and you can whatever. Even if you believe in chalak, that's it, right? You can grinding is the tefer. That's the tefer. That's the seam where some people say this way, some people go that way. It's a Yerushalmi, if I remember correctly. But okay, so it does say here, don't do malacha, and it says it's a mikra kodesh. Shabbat is not called mikra kodesh until Vayikra. So now open up. These are the psukim. Danny's heard me talk about this multiple times. If you open up the chapter 23 in Vayikra, in Emor, it's the first time Shabbat is called Mikra Kodesh. And here you have this interesting introduction, chapter 1, right? This is the parsha of the Moadim. This is what we read on all the holidays. So here I want you to just look at the psukim. So it says, "Vaydaber Hashem Moshe le'mor, dabar bnei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem mikra kodesh, modeh Hashem asher tikru otam mikra kodesh elehem moadai." Here are the Moadim. And then it says, "Shesh yamim ta'aseh melacha, u'v'yom hashvi Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'asu, Shabbat hi l'Hashem b'chol mashmotechem." And all the Mefarshim, right, Rashi and the Ramban, all go crazy. Like, you just said you're going to tell me Moadei Hashem, and then you jump to Shabbat. Right, and then it starts, and then it starts again. Right, that's Pesach starts, right? The Chag Pesach starts on Erev Pesach, Chamisha is Chag Matzot, right? This is the difference between Chag Matzot. And then you have, right, Shavu, right, Shavuos, right? You have the second day of Pesach, and Shavuos, counting, and then you have the other ones. I'll just show you very quickly, just so you could see. Right, in Pasuk Tetvav, we have Usvartan Lachem Macharat HaShabbat Mi'oav Yechem Et Omer Tnufa Sheva Shabbatot Tmimotiena. You'll see why I'm doing this in a minute. Al Macharat HaShabbat Tishbu Chamishim Yom. Right, and then it says there on Pasuk Kaf Aleph, on the 50th day, Kratem Betzam Mayom Ezer Mikra Kodesh Yelachem, another Mikra Kodesh, Kol Melachat Avodah Lo Ta'asu. Then you have in Pasuk Kaf Gimel, Pasuk Kaf Dalet, Daber Bnei Yisrael Lemor B'Chodesh Hashvi Be'echad LaChodesh Yelachem Shabbaton Zichron Shua Mikra Kodesh. That's Rosh Hashanah. Yeah. Correct. Melachat Avodah again. Melachat Avodah La Ta'asu. And then in Pasuk Kav Zayin, Ach Be'asor LaChodesh Hashvi Hazeh Yom Kippurim Mikra Kodesh Yelachem. That's Yom Kippur. And then in Shabbat Shabbaton. And then in Pasuk Lamed Daled you have Sukkot. Right, the first day of Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeret. And then it goes back in Pasuk Lamed Daled El Moadei Hashem. Before I get to the Shabbat, why Shabbos interrupts, which the Ramban has his theory that the Ramban differentiates between Malacha and Malachat Avodah that we've talked about in the past, and we'll talk about it again next week. There is the famous position of the Gra. Remember this or not? Okay, so this is what I thought you'd remember, but very quickly. The Gra came along and said in his super creative reading of the whole thing, he said, I'm sorry that everybody spent, 800 years writing about this, try why Shabbos is interrupted, but he said, maybe you don't have to read this like this at all. Look at the psukim again. Look at the first psukim. Pasuk Bet. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem moadei Hashem asher tikru me'ektam mikra kodesh ele moadai. Sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha. U'v'yom hashvi Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'asu. Shabbat hi l'Hashem b'chol mashmotechem. So the aggressive. Why is Shabbat called Shabbat Shabbaton? Very good. You've heard it before, or you just figured it out? Okay, you heard it before. Right. This is the guy. Right. Or it's the Shabbat. This is not a pasuk about Shabbat. It's about Yontif. It's about Yontif. What are the 6 days? You got first day and last day of Pesach, 2, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shavuos, and no, what did I miss? I got too many then. Oh, Rosh Hashanah is only 1 day. 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, 1 day of Yom Kippur, 2 of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, Pesach 1 and Pesach. No, I'm still. I know one. One more time. Because Yom Kippur is the Shabbat Shabbaton. Sorry. So it's out of order. That's why I mean. You have Pesach 1 and 7. Right, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot 1 and Shmini Atzeret, and then the Shabbat Shabbaton is Yom Kippur. Right? It's clever. The problem is it's out of order because Sukkot comes at the end, and Yom Kippur should have come at the end. This does fit into a whole set of other theories, right? Rav Yoel's thing about that Yom Kippur is really the end of the year, right? Yom Kippur is the end of the year because Yom Kippur is the end of the solar year. You ever think about that? We have 354 days in the lunar year, and they have 364 days in the solar year. So if you just add 10 days, you get the Yom Kippur, and then Yom Kippur is really Rosh Hashanah. And that's why Yoel claims that in the first year when Solomon built the temple, right? You know this thing, right? There was no, right? The Torah talks about they built they dedicated the temple on Rosh Hashanah. There's no Yom Kippur. They didn't celebrate Yom Kippur that year. So he says there was no need to celebrate Yom Kippur because they started the world again when the temple was built, because the temple is just a recreation of the world. It's world. Because it doesn't say they celebrated, it says they celebrated Rosh Hashanah, and the next thing they celebrated was Sukkot. So he said you didn't need Yom Kippur that year because it wasn't finishing the solar year. It's a brilliant proof. It's just genius. That's like Rav Yoel's brilliance that he was able to come up with that. Either way, so if you adopt it, okay, I have more to say about the Gemara, but not for now. But the whole thing is very clever when you read the Psukim. It's like, and then you can't forget this ever. But all that being said, all the Mefarshim say this is Shabbat. How is this relevant for us in our discussion of Lelאו Yצאת or Lechalek Yצאת? Well, this seemingly raises the possibility, right, that Shabbat and Moed are integrally connected, right? In other words, that whatever the melachot for Shabbat are should be the melachot for Yom Tov. We never have a definition. Where do we learn malacha on Shabbat from? From when they built the temple, right? How many times it says malacha? It says it 39 times. No, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but the Isser malacha on Yom Tov is basically derived. It's drawn from Shabbat. It's drawn from these psukim because, right? You understand? Because this is the first time Shabbat is called the Mikra Kodesh, and then right afterwards, all the others are called Mikra Kodesh. Well, if that's Mikra Kodesh, then this should be Mikra Kodesh, and therefore, and therefore,
maybe the Havara thing.
Right, exactly. If Abara is Lelאו Yצאת. So on what basis? Right? In other words, yes, Yom Tov is connected to Shabbat. Yes, Ein Bein Shabbat Yom Tov El Kol Nefesh Bilvad. But that's not exhaustive. That's just to tell you the model. The model of Yom Tov is Shabbat. But it doesn't mean everything necessarily transfers over. In other words, maybe the Lavim don't transfer over. I'm not trying to tell you to start lighting things on Yom Tov and feel good about it. I'm just telling you that there's actually some logic to it, that what defines, or one of the things that defines Shabbat is the Isser Malacha, right? And because of that, once something's not a Malacha, it's a second, how would you say, the second grade, right? Like it's a secondary Isser, it's Asr, but it doesn't necessarily have to transfer over to Yom Tov, because the whole definition of what Malacha is, again, leaving aside Ochel Nefesh, right? But because Ochel Nefesh comes from here also, because Malachat Avodah, not Ochel Nefesh, but leaving that aside, it's all derived from Sheshet Yamim Tavod, right? And it's all derived from Shabbat. So, great. This is the first time Shabbat is called Mikra Kodesh. We're going to learn all the Mikra Kodesh from them. Shabbat's Mikra Kodesh is Malacha. And because of that, you're going to be, okay. Like, Rav Rosenzweig had this great proof. I'll just mention it outside very quickly. I mentioned before that if you believe Lechalek Yצאת, then you're chayav, like if you forget it's Shabbat, and you do writing and cooking, you're chayav 3. What if you forget all 39? All 39 malachot. Like you thought it was, and you do them all in one night. You thought it was okay to write, forget about it. You knew it was Shabbat, but you thought it was okay to write, and you thought it was okay to cook, and you thought it was okay to sew, and you thought it was okay to, and you, right. So the Gemara addresses that question. So you see that malacha is like a definitional issue. It's more important. The Gemara says, "Oh, you forgot Kiddush." That's interesting. In other words, the Gemara sees also like this is an essential. In other words, if you forget the malacha, that's Shabbat basically. Which we like to say, yes, there's positive commandments, but the truth is that the definition of Shabbat, the connection to Mishkan, the whole thing is based on the malachot. So the moment we say Lelאו Yצאת, we're not just saying some sort of technical thing. We're saying lighting a fire is not a total clash with Shabbat, because the clash with Shabbat is the malachot, right? And this is not that, right? And therefore, you're open to the possibility, which I said before is it seems very radical that it wouldn't be us on Yom Tov. No, we're open to that possibility. Okay, could we say it in other areas? We in the end paskin that lighting a fire is Lechalek Yצאת, but there are other areas where we're not 100% sure. Right, there might be an Isser on Shabbos. Open up your dictionaries to this week's parsha, where there's an Isser on Shabbos, at least according to the Rambam. Machlokes Rambam and Ramban. I'm going to show you in 1 second. And the question is that relevant to Yom Tov? Whereas until now I've been talking in theory because we pass on Lechalek Yçאת. Whereas we pass on, that one of the 39 malachos is lighting a fire. What Isser is there on Shabbos There's actually two, but one is in this week's parsha, so we'll focus on that one. What's the Isser on Shabbos? There's an Isser on Shabbos to do something that is not part of certain Malacha. Do you know that? There's two. Okay, yeah, very good, Danny. Excellent. The other one is mechamer. Do you remember mechamer? Mechamer is when I prod the animal, not prod like prod the animal to go plow. I go, right, or I do it with a stick or something, right? I remember the Gemara has a whole discussion. Maybe you remember this we talked about this many years ago about if like I scream, am I chayav for malacha? In other words, I didn't plow the animal. I didn't stand on top of the animal going like this. I just said, go do it. Come on, go. Right, or I said to the dog, go eat that plant. So am I chayav? Like the animal just did a malacha. Right, but what did I do? Right. So coming back to so let's go to Tchumin. Okay, so this first of all you have to know it's a machlokes Ram and Ramban, whether it's a malacha at all. So here we'll just open up the Sefer Chinuch, the Mitzvah Kaf Dalet is the next source in the Gemara in front of us, on the page in front of us. Right? I'm giving you the Torah for Shabbos. Unless David wrote about it already. Okay, so there's one lo taseh in this week's parsha. There's only one mitzvah in this week's parsha. Okay, there's no mitzvah to cross the sea and act like the Jews did when they left Egypt, right? You can't walk outside of Gvulim Shneimar. Al Yitzei Ish Mimkomo B'Yom HaShvi. There's a machlokes whether it's 12 meal, 3 parsa, whatever. That's not so important. Okay, how far it is, but the Rambam and the Chinuch in his wake say that Tchumin is asur. Now here, this is just a throwaway. You have to just notice that the Ramban, right? We've just talked in the Shabbos afternoon shir many times already, but the Ramban, I think not even here, right? We talked about the Ramban has, disagrees on like 18 different mitzvot. So this is one of them. Haramban basagotav sefer mitzvot katav ki ma shamar Rambam b'sefer mitzvot shelo yishet tchumin doraita will be oter mi'alpayim amma. The Ram only means it not when it's super far, but it's even doraita when it's oter mi'alpayim amma. Because of this, he says that's what the Rambam meant. Not what the Chinuch says. 3 parsa is a lot more than alpayim amma. By the way, nafka minalin in safek. You're walking and all of a sudden you say, "Am I outside of tchum or not?" Right? Can you even take one more step? If it's a doraita, you have to turn around right away. If it's the Rabban, you have a little more flexibility, right? So again, the simple reading of the way the Chinuch put the Rambam is no, that it's all the Rabban except if it's really far. You won't walk that far on Shabbat. Well, maybe you would, but no one else would. Right? So what? My brother would right now. My brother would only bike it. So maybe okay. So I don't think he bikes on Shabbat. Okay, so. He says that's what this Tchumin Doraita will be oter mi'alpayim amma. V'chein ma shamar b'chibur hagadol. Shechazar mizeh hashur shel Torah shalosh parsot. So there's a debate which one the Rambam. But in the end, the Ramban says hakol ta'u. She'ein lanu isur Tchumin Doraita klal. The Ramban says even though he says I disagree with because the Rambam has 2 different sources where he says is it 3 parsa, it's 12 meal, or does he hold it's 2,000 amma Doraita? But he says the whole thing is a big mistake because I don't think the Ramban says any of this is Doraita. Okay, well, if it's not doraita, it's not relevant to our discussion. The question is, if you believe like the Rambam, at whatever stage that it is doraita, what about tchumin on yantif?
Right. Also not.
Wow. Words. Our Tosfot, which until now was just theory, now becomes practice. Is there a din of tchumin on yantif?
Right.
Let's say you take the minimalist position of the Ram. Right. No one would say tchumin is malacha. Tchumin is just a lo taseh. It's a lower class lo taseh. Is there tchumin on yantif? Okay, I'll ask you. We've all had to deal with this. Anybody? So this is a machlokes rishonim. Okay, it's a machlokes rishonim. So just skip down to the Minchar Chinuch. Right? No, I'm not talking about an eruv and carrying. Eruv and carrying you can do because mitoch. Right? Mitoch shetzur letzorach is you can carry a shofar, you can carry a whatever. But or sefer Torah or whatever, and then the question becomes, but tchumin, can you walk forever? Can you go on a tiyul on yantif forever? Just keep walking into the mountains.
Weren't they related? Because
no, they're not. They're 2 different.
You might carry something past the tomb, but if
No. Carrying is one of the lam tamalacha. Carrying some malacha. Tchumin is not malacha. Tchumin is al yitziyum from gomko. It's a totally different. I know we grew up in America thinking like all this stuff was connected because we didn't understand it. But now I'm telling you, Okay, just be aware. Tchumen is one thing, right? Seth is waiting for me to give him an answer. Can I walk very far on Yom Tov? Okay, the answer is, halacha l'maaseh, before we get to the Mincha Chinuch, because we only have a couple more minutes, but the answer is that you can't really walk super far.
Yeah.
You cannot walk super far. More than 2,000 amen, I think you're allowed to walk, because that's a suffix where the Rambam and the is still right. Which if it's D'Rabbanan, then it's not relevant. If it's not relevant because it was only said in Shabbat. If it's D'Oraita and we transfer it over to Yom Tov, then in principle, yeah, it would be a problem. But the question is, which Rambam do we transfer over? The 2,000 amen Rambam or the 12? The 12 meal. That's far. How could that be? Let's say 10 miles. 10 miles.
Actually, in the sea.
Here is not a problem. You're in the Tchum here.
What?
No, I have it.
No, but you're in the Tchum. There's houses the whole way. Yeah, that you can certainly.
Maybe if you walk to the field, but even then.
No, it doesn't make a difference.
In the Gush.
In the Gush, right. In the Gush, in the old days, I don't know if it's still that way, but in the old days when I used to go to Efrat for lunch, we would put out I only did it once. And we put out a Erev Tchumen on Shabbos.
That's not safe.
Right. But
Well, it's not safe for the Tchumen, but
okay, so I'm pretty sure halacha l'maaseh. I'm almost 100% sure. You can correct me. Someone can look at. Yeah, it's something like 10 miles. I don't think you'd go walking 10 miles out into nature. Maybe from your country house you'd do it. Yeah, I don't know. To the top of the mountain. What, to the top of the mountain?
Top mountain.
5 miles.
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, I guess you could argue that maybe
the other 6 days a week.
Well, it's being like the whole time, then you put an air on and you're fine.
right. I think you're fine if you put an air on the whole thing. Yeah.
You
So
must be fine because we do it in the city.
no, but you have houses along the way. I have to think about it. I don't know. I have to check about that too. I'm not asking you if you ever walk up the mountain on Shabbos or not. I'm not gonna go
No, think about
walking up the road. Right. Okay. So very, very quickly, I see I'm not going to get to everything, but this is an issue that was discussed like across the board. I have it here in the Mincha Chinuch, I have it here in the Son of the Rambam. Everybody talked about this, right? Here, just go to the second paragraph of the Mincha Chinuch quickly. I'm glad this is engaging to you. It's very interesting in my opinion. Right. So the first paragraph he talks about whether it's right, but then he says in the second paragraph where it starts Hinela Kaman mitzvah reish. Don't be like that one. Mitzvah reish tali bed. Heveti deyot itchumin asur min haTorah b'yom tov. Kevin hu lav malacha. He says there's machlokes opinions. Im ken eno bechal malacha shasurat Torah b'yom tov. Rak b'Shabbat zerat hakatuv al yitzei. Below b'yom tov. It's Jeff. Once I told you today this week's parsha has a mitzvah. The mitzvah is al yitzei on Yom HaShvi. So it's just Yom HaShvi. That's all. Achtat Rashi b'chagiga digam b'yom tov tchumen d'oraita. Okay, so Seth, I'm glad you're not listening for this part of it. Rashi says that. Vayin Beit Yosef l'kaman herachti u'lechora afilu efshar lomar nihid lo havi b'chlal malacha. So the Mincha Chinuch basically wants to destroy with the argument that I just made. He says nihid lo havi b'chlal malacha ve'no ver b'lav. It's even though tchumen you don't. He means lav lo taseh kol malacha. B'kol makom adata Tosfot yivamach of Rashba da'aseh. The asay the tishbot who af bidvarim the lav bichal malacha. He says maybe you'll hold it. It's an asay of tishbot. Tishbot covers all even the lo ta'asays that are less than malacha. Imken efshar b'yom tov aser mitam asay the shabbaton. Wait, since the psukim we just read it says you have to do shabbat shabbaton or shabbaton. So he says maybe that covers. Yeah, you don't violate the lo ta'aseh kol malacha for tchumin. Because maybe tchumen is only d'Rabbanan, or maybe there is no tchumen on Yom Tov, but because it's not a malacha, it doesn't transfer. But there's still an asay of Shabbaton, and that covers all the lo ta'asays. So you're not gonna, if you walk outside of tchum on Yom Tov, you'll violate Shabbaton. You won't violate lo ta'aseh kol malacha. I grant you it's not a malacha, but it's still a Shabbaton. It's still one of the prohibited things. That's resting.
Don't say Shabbat for every
I think it does.
But only Rosh Hashanah.
Yes, I agree with you.
Which is why it's interesting. Rosh Hashanah should maybe have a different halacha on Yom Tov.
I think it says Shabbaton Zichron Shua. You're right. What about in Sukkot? It also doesn't say Shabbaton. Yes, you're right. No, you're wrong. Pasuk Lamed Tet. Ach b'chamisha asar l'chodesh hashvi'i b'asmechem etvuat haaretz l'chol l'chag Hashem l'shvat yamim v'yom harishon Shabbaton u'v'yom hashvi'i Shabbaton. Okay, so it does say it regarding Yom Tov as well. So he does raise that possibility. Or you could do that. So you have like a different. That's a variation on the theme. One sec.
But that moves the Rabbi Hanan, right? Well, we use Shabbaton to differentiate the Shabbat.
Between the Shabbos and the Yom Tov, correct. But if you just look in the next thing, there's one more text I wanted to study quickly. Okay, just the next text is a tshuva of the Rambam's son, the Maaseh Nisim. That's the Rambam's son, and he got a question about this also, about whether it's Tchumen. Once your father believed that Tchumen is Doraisa, so what happens on Yom Tov? Once he got that exact question, we're not going to go into it. Then he quotes, I'm just going to Minchad Chinuch, this is the last text we'll do today very, very quickly. Hinei Sfarta Beit Yosef shekatav tikem b'Shabbat havilei rak isur lav. In other words, Tchumen is only a lav. Ve'eno b'chal malacha im ken b'yom tov any isur. Right. In other words, since it's a lower quality isur, it's not a malacha, so on Yom Tov it's not a problem. V'chenu kim b'chsot so lel. Emet asvarat tova v'nechona linyan mechamer. That's the other one. Mechamer is prodding, encouraging, or Tchumen. What's Shin Ben? I don't remember. Okay. This is the last part I want to do. He says, I'm willing to grant you that halacha l'maaseh, there's no tchumen on Yontif. Again, I owe you an answer. I'll get you back there next week, whether halacha l'maaseh. He says, I'm willing to grant there's no tchumen on Yontif because that's a lower level lav. And I'm willing to grant you the mechamer, there's no issue. Right? Prodding, because that's a lower level lav. It's usur, but it's not a malacha. But he says, Havar, I'm not willing to give in so quickly. He says, even if I adopt the position of Lalav Yatzad, I'm not willing to give you the position, I'm not willing to grant you that on Yom Tov it would be mutter. Because I can differentiate between even though they're all lower levels, but within the lower levels, there's lower levels and lower levels, if you will. What's the difference? He says, it's just not possible. You understand why this is interesting to me? Because he's going to differentiate between the lower level lavin, right? That's a very good alliteration, lower level lavin. Okay? Dine b'Shabbat mevor the sover the lav yatzad ki chazina da Torah hotzia havara min hachlal shehi bechlal lo taaseh kol malacha the kol malacha yalfinan mi mishkan mevor sham mishkan haya havara ayin sham besugya. Okay, sover chad mandamer de lachalak yatzad kol mandala sverlei the Torah hotzia min hachlal after he bechlal malacha haya b'mishkan mikom makom zerat hakatufu deno chayav skila rak lav bilav. What's his distinction? He says, I'll tell you the difference between mechamer and tchumen and havara. He says, I grant you that havara, if you hold havara lalav yatzeh, is not a malacha, but it was still in the Mishkan. Don't tell me it wasn't in the Mishkan. They burnt things in the Mishkan. So when the Torah tells you I'm dropping it out of the system of malacha, but we still know it has a much more serious import than tchumen or some of these other things that are just laughing on the side. That didn't happen in the Mishkan. It didn't happen in the building of the Mishkan. The Torah, what's the best proof? That where is Tchumen in Parshat Beshalach, and where is Havara right after Shabbos? Right? You understand? It's not in the context of a nice story. It's right after he says, I still see that as very different. So in other words, this last text basically differentiates between different lower level lavin. Okay. So what we saw today was this position of Hara Lav Yat. So we have three answers to how we got that out of Rabbi Akiva. That's where we started. But then we need to galgal to a very, very interesting place. That maybe there's differences between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Because even though, and again, this is all in contrast to the simple reading of the Mishnah and Masach and Megillah. The Mishnah and Masach and Megillah says there's only one difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. But no, it turns out now Yom Tov is really derived from Shabbos, but it's only derived to the definition of malacha. Right? And the moment you don't have malacha, that's Tosfos' second answer, as opposed to the aseh bitzlo, aseh and aseh, or as opposed to it's just a linguistic thing, right? You learn now from here, Avara Lalav Yatzad, because you wouldn't necessarily move it over to Yom Tov. And because of that, we're open to the possibility of raising the question regarding Tchumen and Mechamer, maybe some other things. We talked about the question for a couple of seconds about if you're going to be chayav, if you do, right, or if you believe Lalav Yatzad, then you wouldn't necessarily be chayav if you do You know, if you forget about lighting a candle on Shabbos, that just wouldn't be an issue. And again, it would open up a different type of yontif in the end, if you really believe this position all the way, if you took this so seriously. Okay, that leaves us with mitoch. I got to figure out how I'm going to attack mitoch in this context. Like, in other words, it just comes up in one line. So we just looked at the one line today, but that was a whole new area, and this Tosfos you can't ignore. So next week, I think we'll talk about mitoch, but it probably won't be so much on the page. Mitoch again. What can you do? What can't you do? What are the parameters, etc. So we'll talk about that a little, and then we'll move on to the Gemara. I want to get to the what I do want to talk about next week. Definitely is why you can't burn the chametz on Pesach itself. Like, why not just burn it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You too. Have a good day and a good week.
And burn, there's no way of burning any other way. Burn it traditionally or burn any
You're
other.
burning the other way. You're still interested in the acid thing, huh?
Yes.